welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, only NFL podcast. One of the hosts thinks zone blocking is when he's put in a crate. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. He's rarely put in a crate these days at his age. And I am so excited to preview the NFC North today with longtime friend of the show, friend of mine, recently moved back to Chicago, which is, of course, one of the teams we're going to talk about. Carmen Vitali, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. My dog is currently in a crate, but that's because he's not even 8 months old. So he spends quite a bit of time in his crate.
Yeah. Lenny, we got when he was 3, so he was already sort of trained, but he does not respond well to being confined at this point. And I get it. I'm older, Lenny. I don't like being in small spaces either. Carmen, the NFC North is a really fun division. I've talked about a few of these teams on my top 10 offenses and top 10 defenses pod, the Lions and the Packers on both, the VIkings defense. It remains a very good division, arguably the best division. But the team I want to start with today is one I haven't talked about in a while. And like I alluded to this, you are in Chicago. You are from Chicago. You know this team extremely well. And I'm very excited to get into it because it's a new day for the Chicago Bears. We'll find out. Optimism abounds. I don't know. I feel like Bears fans are optimistic and they're glad they got their guy in Ben Johnson and they're hopeful that Caleb can turn things around. But at this point, they've been through so much. They're a little bit jaded about all of it. They're not delusional. I'll put it that way. I don't feel like they are delusional at this point.
I think we might have to agree to disagree, but it's not their fault. There's not a whole lot of in-season success that Bears fans have been able to hold on to. That's why the 1985 Super Bowl team is still much like it's very relevant in the minds of Bears fans, even though a lot of us now weren't even around for that.
Yeah.
I'm one of those jaded people because I did grow up with this team where you have to show me before I'm going to believe. And I don't think that that's unfair because at this point, every single offseason, there's all of this optimism. And I feel like Bears fans just kind of get the rug pulled out from underneath them every single time. And why they keep believing without seeing is a true magical kind of mystery. I mean, this is probably a city where most people still believe in Santa Claus, judging off of all of these Bears fans that just want, I mean, and I think a lot of it comes from wanting to believe, right? And you want to believe this time around is different. And I will say, for as wet blankety as I just sounded, this is the most optimistic I've been about the Chicago Bears.
Okay, good.
I don't know how long. So I'm holding off by saying this time is definitely different because again, we have the things on paper are good. We've not played a game yet.
Yeah. It's a lot of wait and see, and also Caleb Williams is coming off like just a statistically horrible season for a quarterback. But I've talked about this a lot. I think there were enough flashes there to make you not give up hope, abandon hope. There were streaks. There were a couple games here and there where he looked good, and the system around him was awful. The offense was terrible. There's been obviously a lot of reporting about sort of the lack of organization, the coaching miscues. And I'm optimistic about Ben Johnson for a litany of reasons that we'll get into. But the recent track record of like quote unquote offensive wonderkins going on to become head coaches is good, right? Like this isn't, I think that we see this and there's always like the temptation to react with skepticism. Well, of course, offensive line for the Lions isn't coming with him and, another Wonder Boy nerd and handled the Washington thing weirdly or whatever. But truth be told, this is just it's a proof. There's a reason why so often these brilliant play callers get hired as head coaches. I want to talk to you about why it failed last year. And then we can let's start with the offense. Let's talk about what was the problem last year. And then we can talk about whether or not it'll be fixed. So last year, the offense was 26th in passing DVOA, 25th in rushing. All of Caleb's numbers are pretty ugly, frankly. It's really hard to find anything that's not, when you slice up the splits. Offensive line, I think times struggled, particularly in the interior at times. Caleb made it worse. Going back and watching, some of his good games and also a couple of his not so great ones over the summer, I think what strikes me the most is just he appears to have like a total lack of conviction in what he's seeing and the structure of the offense he's playing in and his receivers. Let's start there. Like, what do you think was his biggest flaw? The weird thing is, Carmen, I think if I had to guess going into this year, what would have been his biggest flaw going into his rookie season based on who he was as a college prospect, I would have said he's probably going to run around and take a lot of dumb sacks. That wasn't really it, though. He was actually sometimes trying to stay in the pocket, but then he just wasn't hitting eject or delivering the ball. It's triggering.
Right.
So what do you think was the biggest problem last year?
I mean, I really do think it was a perfect storm of things that just went wrong for him in particular, for the coaching staff, for all of that. Because if you look at Caleb Williams, who he was as a college player, and I agree with you, I was all prepared for him to do the silly things, the
Yeah.
want to play hero ball things, the backyard scramble around, try and get it down the field, make some bad decisions in that way. And I think Caleb was very acutely aware that this was the perception of him. And he tried to kind of fight against that almost to his detriment, where he completely forgot how to scramble to keep his eyes downfield, to make those decisions that he made so well in college. And he was being coached and overwhelmed, I think, with all of this information for this new scheme, trying to adjust the speed of the game at the NFL level. And he was just so in his own head that you saw him trying to get through these progressions over and over and over again. And he was just paralyzed by where he was supposed to go with the ball, who he was supposed to throw to, what he was supposed to be seeing, which also wasn't always necessarily the case
Yeah.
either. I remember thinking, especially because Caleb went 1, Jaden Daniels goes 2 to Washington. And it provides a really good case study, kind of a stark analysis of the two. And then you get to kind of compare how they were treated in their introduction to the league. And as soon as I saw Caleb Williams making every single pre-snap decision, every single identification, every single like sliding protections and I'm like, why are you not having the center do this? Why are you not trying to take things off of Caleb Williams' plate? Why are you giving him the full breadth of the offense right off the bat? Because you could see it in Washington. I think through the first 4 weeks of the season last year, Jaden Daniels didn't attempt to pass over 10 yards. They were very, very intentional with starting out very basic with him and not asking him to do too much and then opening it up. That was not the case with Caleb Williams. And so he's trying to internalize all this information while trying to make sure that he's the one, like he's still playing his game, but he's not doing too much of his game because that was a knock against him and this, that, the other. And then you don't have any sort of command from the coaching staff. You don't have any sort of direction. It comes out in the Seth Wickersham bombshell that Caleb Williams was watching film mostly on his own, a lot of the times on his own, wasn't given any sort of direction. And while you want your NFL quarterback to be a self-starter, that's not fair to put on a rookie and say, hey, yeah, just you figure it out. You want to be on the same page as your play caller, and that was just never the case. So it was just this perfect storm of no real leadership, Caleb Williams in his own head, kind of trying to figure out how to play his game at the NFL level and not receiving a whole lot of support.
Yeah, that's well put. The center thing I think is really notable. To me, yeah, just in terms of setting protections as a rookie and also having a lot on his plate, such a clear priority for this team in the offseason to not repeat that, going out, spending big on the interior of the offensive line, signing the best free agent center available, Drew Dahlman from Atlanta, as well as, trading for the two guards, Joe Tooney, bringing in Jonah Jackson, veterans, right? And obviously Ben Johnson has a history with Jackson. That struck me as very smart, very Ben Johnson probably directed. But yeah, to go back to the offense again before we get to Ben Johnson, I mean, it it's in when I was watching it, I wasn't thinking like, wow, this is a total disaster. The play calling sucks. It's not like they were doing things that made no sense, but it also felt like there was how do I put this? I didn't quite understand the way the players were being used a lot of the time. And it felt like there was a lot of miscast roles, maybe variable levels of effort. To go back to the role thing, so much Keenan Allen.
So much.
which I didn't expect, but I pulled this. He led all Bears in targets per route run. He wasn't, on the field as much as like DJ Moore there, but the other thing that blew my mind, so he had the lowest max speed of his career, which is not surprising at his age, yet had the highest percent of deep routes of his career. And it's not a ton. It's not like they were constantly like telling him to go deep, but why would you be asking Keenan Allen to do that ever at this point?
No.
Why did he have the highest route depth in general since 2019? Like they're just I I didn't really understand it. And that to me has to come down to coaching and you have to pin that on them.
I really think that, I mean, you can pull so many of those advanced metrics and see all of these guys that just felt out of place, and it doesn't take advanced metrics to see that. Like Keenan Allen is a slot guy. He's been a slot guy in his career. Why are you asking him to go down the field, down the sideline? I get that you have DJ Moore, and DJ Moore has honestly throughout his entire career really played ball with whatever team he was on, whether it be in Carolina, whether it be, with the Bears with Justin Fields to start out with and Caleb Williams. He will do whatever is asked of him until a certain point where he sees it's not working. And that became increasingly evident as the season went on, where you lost the locker room in general. And I think it was because none of these guys really knew what they were doing, why they were doing it. You hear coaches talk so much about, we have our why, and this is why we do things, and you need to understand this, that, and the other about why. And Bears players were left wondering why. They were like, I don't get it. Like they didn't understand this game. There didn't seem to be any continuity. It really did seem, because I watched so much of Shane Waldron's scheme in Seattle, and I saw so many, like, multiple tight end sets. I saw a lot of motion, a lot of really good things to maximize Geno Smith, and you saw that obviously it led to a resurgence in Geno's career. So I thought that there would be some of that or more of that. And I think, you mentioned Keenan Allen, but you talk about somebody who didn't get utilized well or correctly. Cole Kmet is another one of those guys where you're like, you have this tight end, you gave him a new contract. You get Gerald Everett, you bring him over from Seattle. I get it. Okay, some continuity. So he's someone who knows who you are as a play caller. But there was just, there were so many times where people were left asking, hey, tight ends can be a safety blanket for these young quarterbacks. Why you have a really good kind of all-around tight end on your roster? Why are you not utilizing Cole Kmet in those short yardage situations, short to intermediate for that matter? You're not at all kind of exploiting what Cole Kmet can be for you. Why? And so it all came back to no one had any answers. The players least of all. So that devolves. Those situations devolve, especially when you're losing, to just chaos, which is what it did.
I think that brings me to Ben Johnson, and one reason why I'm excited for him. I think, again, people look at Detroit and they think about like the trick plays and the extra linemen and the whoop-de-doo and all of that, and they act like it's not substantive. But I actually think his offense was incredibly substantive in terms of what you just described, which is giving players the why. We'll get to the Lions, but like all of those skill players knew their roles, understood, if I'm doing this to set up this down the road, I'm doing this on third down to set up fourth down, and also felt like the offense was actually catered to their skill sets. There's amazing skill players in Detroit, but I would argue Ben Johnson did a really good job of figuring out exactly what made them amazing and leaning into that. So now he comes to Chicago, and he's given a lot of really good players to work with, players that they added to, of course, in the draft. So now Keenan Allen is gone. You've got DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Luther Burden in the slot with Zacchaeus and Olamide Zacchaeus, Dev Duvernay. They added another tight end in the first round, Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet. Didn't add a running back. They chose tight end and then receiver. How do you see those guys fitting into the Ben Johnson offense? Because there's this temptation to just look at Detroit and try to kind of map on who's in this role, who's in that role, which is fair, I think. But how do you see him using this particular group, which I would argue has a ton of potential?
It does. And I do think that there is that temptation to say, okay, well, Detroit did this really well. They had these players who fits, like who's the Amon-Ra St. Brown on this team? And, do they have a Jahmyr Gibbs? Which the answer is clearly not. But I don't think that that's fair necessarily because of who Ben Johnson is as a play caller, as a coach, as a football mind, quite frankly. He has talked a lot about setting individual plans for each player to not only raise their ceiling, exploit their strengths, all of that. Because I asked him specifically about this the first day he was at Hallis, and he said, I know that you're talking about exploiting players' strengths and fitting that together as a puzzle piece, as a puzzle. But what I'm also trying to do is raise their floor. So that way you do remain multiple, you do remain with a scheme that fits the players, but it doesn't look like anything that he's done before. He cautioned against, expecting Detroit's offense. And I think that that's twofold. I think not only are you not going to get the same players, like you don't have the same, you can't fit one into the other. But I also think that Detroit's offense last year, especially, leading in points per game, all of that, the potency of it, the pettiness of it, quite frankly, that came with time.
Yeah.
That was an evolution. You look back at 2022, Ben Johnson's first year as offensive coordinator in Detroit, and I keep bringing this up, they started 1-6. This was not a potent offense. This did not look like the cohesive unit that you saw, and it takes time. But what he does so well, which goes back to your initial point of, he tells players why. I was in the Detroit locker room when they were 1-6 in 2022. You would have never known it. All of those guys had a belief and they had confidence in the team turning it around. And so I think first and foremost, if you're Ben Johnson, you have to say, hey, listen, yes, this is my track record. This is what I'm capable of. And I'm going to make you the best player that you can be, but you're going to have to trust me in return. And it may not happen right away. And are Bears fans going to allow that? That's kind of the biggest question in my mind. That's why I'm the wet blanket, the one that's trying to preach a little bit of, hey, just pump the brakes a little bit. It's going to take them a while to figure out what this offense looks like in Chicago with this personnel, because I think all the best coaches in the league are the ones that really do take into account and understand who they're working with and how they all fit together, not necessarily how they fit into their system, if that makes sense.
Well, I think it does make sense. And I think it brings me to my last question about the offense, which is, where does Caleb, like the marriage between Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson? Because Caleb Williams is a very different quarterback from Jared Goff. Jared Goff is like a machine, right? Under center, the most under center quarterback in the league. He turns back to the defense, turn around, and deliver that dig. And it is going to be on time, and it is going to be accurate. He's going to stand in the face of it. We're going to talk about him in a second. How do you see this marriage playing out? Like, because for example, last year, the Bears offense was 29th in play action rate, Lions first. Is that we're going to see a lot more of? How does Caleb fit into that? Do we think he's going to be under center to that same degree? Are there things that you've heard Ben or Caleb talk about that are giving you expectations for what this offense might look like? Because to me, that marriage is the crux of this whole thing. If he can't get Caleb to believe in his offense, it's not going to work out. So what does that offense look like?
Yeah, and I do think there is going to be quite an uptick in play action because of the fact of just the domino effect that play action has. And it's something that's very integral when you're talking about a Ben Johnson offense. It's something that while everything's not going to look exactly the same, there are core concepts that he is going to bring over with him because that's just the way his mind works. That's the way he believes in offense. So play action, I think, is one of those big things where you have to get the quarterback comfortable under center. That's something they have worked on this offseason. It was something that Caleb, I guess, already wanted to do more of and to test out. And so in those initial meetings with Ben Johnson, as they're kind of devising what this is all going to look like, it was one of those things that kind of lined up with each other where there's been changes to Caleb's footwork because of it. But I think a lot of it has to do with going under center more, increasing that play action rate, because again, that helps. That doesn't only help Caleb Williams, because inherently, especially for young quarterbacks that have really operated mostly in the college systems, turning your back to a defense is not easy to do, even if it's only for a fraction of a second. It's something that Jared Goff thrived in, but he was a veteran. So that's something you have to get these guys comfortable with in the initial, like when you're first starting out, but then it opens up so many things. It delays the rush. It helps your offensive line out in that way. It really, it presents the threat of the run. We're going to see how that all kind of marries up, because I don't think Bears have the personnel right now do what maybe Ben Johnson would like to do ideally in the run game.
Yeah.
But that's where the tight ends come in. I think that that's a factor. It's really more about getting the ball out of Caleb Williams' hands quickly, efficiently, in those utilizing the short intermediate area of the field, not just because he can throw it deep, just because he can kind of scramble around and make those home run plays doesn't mean that he needs to be doing that all the time. So I think that the structure and the rhythm that play action brings to an offense, we're going to see a lot more of. And that is a testament to just Ben Johnson's kind of, like I said, core philosophy in how offense should be run. And I think that Caleb Williams is really receptive to that. And it seems like all of these things that he wanted to work on came in with Ben. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. I mean, these guys are familiar with each other, even though Caleb only played 1 year for the Bears. He watched Ben Johnson as the Detroit offense was on the field, going up and down the field most of the time on the Chicago Bears.
They both seem thrilled. Ben Johnson wanted this job. I think he believes in the quarterback. I think he's right to have hope for him. So I'm actually optimistic about the offense. Defensively, you kind of have to start with the same place, which is what went wrong, because this was a defense that really regressed pretty significantly last season. They were finished top 10 the year before. I think, everything was falling apart. Matt Eberflus obviously getting fired. The defense is kind of why he kept his job last year. But ultimately, they really struggled, particularly against the run, which was interesting because they were fantastic against the run the season before. But they finished actually 13th in DVOA against the pass, 31st against the run. They did make some changes on this side of the ball, bringing in Grady Jarrett, defensive tackle, Dayo Odeyingbo. They drafted Shamar Turner on the defensive line. Secondary is largely the same. Hopefully sounds like they're getting Jaquan Brisker back, who did miss a decent amount of season with a concussion, which was, something that's really scary with him because he's had a few of those.
Yes.
Okay. So the terms of like the what went wrong, other than Eberflus chaos and Brisker being injured, is there anything? I should add one more. I think Montez Sweat did play with an injury for much of the year, and I think that really affected him. Is there anything else that struck you watching this defense like, ooh, this is their biggest problem and this is what they need to fix next year?
I think a lot of it, and they addressed it this offseason, was the interior of the defensive line, because you were stressing the secondary so much because the pressure wasn't getting there. Guys were not getting home. But I think a lot of it really had to do with the interior and the fact that you did not have that bona fide 3-tech that you need in the scheme that Matt Eberflus ran. And you had the weak side, you have a really good linebacking core. You have the weak side linebacker, which is so it's so heavily relied on in this scheme, but you didn't have the other piece of it up front. And that really created kind of a lose-lose situation for Montez Sweat. It's why he didn't get very many favorable matchups. There was no threat on the other side of Montez Sweat, like the bookend of the defensive line. So, you're doubling up Montez Sweat, and he wasn't getting past those. But you also weren't eating up enough space on the interior, and you weren't keeping that rotation was not deep enough. And so that was the biggest thing to me, where I'm like, all right, now we're stressing the secondary a lot. And when you see Jaquan Brisker go down, it's one of those things where it's just a domino effect. And then on top of that, you obviously add in all of the coaching craziness and the fact that, even in Hard Knocks, I saw, and working for a team, I worked for the Buccaneers for 6 years. For people that don't know, I got really close and got to kind of see just the daily cadence of everything. And something that struck me in Hard Knocks, and the reason I bring this up will become apparent in a second, Matt Eberflus was meeting with Caleb Williams every day. He was meeting with him in his office every day. I personally do not know of a defensive head coach that is having daily meetings with a quarterback and not kind of leaving that up to the offensive coordinator, the quarterback's coach, leaving it to that side of the ball. It's just not physically possible to stretch yourself that thin as a head coach to call the defense, make sure that the defensive scheme, again, doesn't take a step back, doesn't regress. You're still kind of evolving it on top of having to make all of the decisions as a head coach. What time is realistically left over for you to be with the quarterback once a day for an hour? I know it's only an hour, but that makes a huge difference. And I saw that and I was so confused. And I was hoping that it wasn't going to come back and bite them in the butt, but it did. And I just think that Matt Eberflus was stretched too thin because things were, kind of devolving very quickly. And it was, again, just one of those things that he just didn't have enough time to really devote to scheming up, like when Jaquan Brisker went down, for instance. All right, how do we account for that? How do we make up for that absence? That, is it just, it's not usually as simple as just bringing in his backup. If you don't want to drop off, there needs to be adjustments made to every level of that defense, and that just wasn't the case because it was already missing pieces that weren't readily apparent right away.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, and it actually brings me perfectly to something that makes me feel good about this new regime, which
Mhm.
is the Dennis Allen hire.
Yes.
I mentioned that there's a recent history of these like offensive winnerkins going on to be successful in the NFL, but in most cases, they had the defensive vet
Sound like
alongside of
a
them.
bad defensive coordinator that was along for the ride.
In their own division, of course,
Mm,
there's examples in Detroit had great defensive coordinator. KOC having Brian
mhm.
Flores is
Yep.
another excellent example. Sean McVay, I always go back to him. Wade Phillips that
Wade
first
Phillips.
year. When I saw the news that they had hired Allen, I was like, oh, this is exactly what they need, because
Yes.
whatever you think about him as a head coach, that man can call a defense. And I think he also will bring a bit of a philosophical change that's kind of needed for
Yeah.
this group. You know, uh, those Dennis Allen Saints defenses, by the way, we talked about the Bears struggling against the run, have always been phenomenal against the run. Even I would say outplaying sometimes their personnel.
Mhm.
Stylistically, they're very aggressive. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like every defensive coach says we're aggressive. He's actually aggressive. They play a ton of famously cover two man, but
Yeah.
I think that the Bears under Eberflus last few years have been like a very zone heavy defense. But when
Yeah.
they've played man, which is 38% of the time, they've been excellent. They actually last year allowed the lowest QBR in football, first league wide when they played man, 20th when they played zone. I think they have the horses on the back to do it a bit
They do.
more. So I'm excited to see this marriage with Dennis Allen, both from, again, having the veteran when you're the young guy defensive coordinator, but I also think from a style and a schematic perspective, it could also make this defense improve.
I mean, arguably your best defensive player is Jalen Johnson.
Yeah.
And so get him in those lockdown situations that he thrives in, because not only obviously will that help from an on-field standpoint, strictly football X's and O's standpoint, but it helps keep the defense, the energy up. It helps keep, these guys going for each other, and keeps them together. Jalen Johnson has talked so much about how much he loves Dennis Allen's scheme already. Obviously, very minimal installs happen during OTAs, but you do get a feel for kind of what you're going to be doing. And his expectation is a lot more man coverage, which he has been, I guess, begging for, asking for a lot more. And again, you bring up just the discrepancy between how effective they were in man coverage, but the fact that they didn't run it a majority of the time last year. Those are kind of the things that slip through the cracks. And again, it goes back to the very initial point about the Bears and players not understanding why they were doing what they were doing. Because the players, Kevin Byard came out and said it halfway through the season, was like, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know. We want to be coached hard. We want to have leadership from the coaches, and we're not getting it. And this is what's happening. This is why, you have guys going rogue, or you have Tyreek Stevenson taunting the crowd and allowing a Hail Mary to be converted in Washington that will now live on in infamy, and Jaden Daniels highlight reels for the rest of his career. So those things I think are going to be completely cleaned up. I do love Dennis Allen as a coordinator. Like you said, whatever you want to think of him as a head coach, he does. He knows how to call defense. He knows how to kind of, and this is something that Ben Johnson does really well too. He knows how to reward his players when it comes to scheme. And what I mean by that is making it fun for them and having certain packages for certain guys, and saying, oh, are you playing your former team this week? Or are you going up against someone that you hate? Guess
Yeah.
what? I'm going to make sure that you are put in position to make the plays that you want. I'm going to take advantage of the extra motivation for you. And I'm going to reward you with, whether it's a package, a play, what have you. That's something that Dennis Allen is really good at too. And I can't wait to see, these guys respond to it, because I really do think they're going to. And they do. They have the horses, provided everybody stays healthy. My one concern is still Jaquan Brisker, because he said he had
Yeah.
to retrain his brain
Mm.
in order to just to play the game. He was cleared by independent neurologists and some of the best neurologists in the country. So you have to kind of let it, it's his life. This is his career. Those are his decisions to make. But you do have to wonder. I was really surprised that the Bears didn't go after a safety, whether that be in free
Yeah.
agency or the draft, a little bit more aggressively, because I would just think you would want that insurance. But
No, yeah,
there were other holes to
that's the
address.
thing. Yeah, right. No, I know, right? That was I flagged. I'm still not like totally bought in on the pass rush. Hopefully, Sweat being a
Right.
little healthier, and Grady Jarrett is obviously in the
I was like,
deep
the interior,
backfield.
I hope, helps.
Yeah, that's the thing. Can they get something out of Shamar Turner? Grady Jarrett's older, but we'll see. It could be a bounce back. I'm intrigued. That was a long Bears conversation. Like I said, I haven't talked about them at all. The other teams will be a little bit quicker because I've talked about them more. I just wanted to fully devote some time to the Chicago Bears,
Yeah.
because I have kind of neglected them, and I think they're really interesting. The big bad in the division is Detroit Lions. Let's do them next. I've talked about this a lot. Obviously, losing both their offensive and defensive coordinators are huge. We start with the offense first. I'd love to hear what you know and think about John Morton, who's their offensive coordinator, because I don't know a lot, Carmen. He, for those who don't know, was last with the Broncos, which is
Yes.
where Sean Payton and Bo Nix. He was previously the
Share
offensive
DNA.
coordinator, yeah, right, of the Jets. He was an offensive assistant with Detroit in 2022, so he has
Mm-hmm.
a connection there. What do you know about John Morton? What do you think about him? I think the way I would phrase it is, I hate that this is always brought up, but what can the Bears or Lions do to avoid the Philly season where they went with Brian Johnson and they were like, it's cool. Like, who could mess up this offense? And then the offense heavily regressed. Like, how can Detroit avoid that?
Yeah, no, I'll be quite honest with you. That's my concern with this unit. The only kind of saving grace that I think that the Lions have versus what the Eagles had is that Jared Goff is just that much more of a veteran than Jalen Hurts was. So you think that he's kind of I think there's going to be a lot of continuity when it comes to the scheme overall. And we are going to find out, though, how much of the scheme was, the straight install. These are the plays that we've installed in the playbook versus Ben Johnson introducing things, game by game, the gadget stuff, the fun stuff, the petty stuff. I keep saying that, but he is an incredibly petty coach, and it's why I love him so much. But I do think that John Morton, he's very offensive line friendly. He really loves the offensive line. He understands, the crucial role that they play and what Detroit in particular wants to do, what offenses try to do. There is a lot of shared DNA when it comes to, he was already in Detroit, but just being a Sean Payton guy, that obviously overlaps with Dan Campbell and all that. There's a lot of, again, just shared DNA. So I think that the biggest thing that the Lions wanted out of this was just continuity. Hey, who can come in, understand what we're trying to do, and continue it, because you do have so many incredible players. Brad Holmes has done an incredible job, not only building the team, but sustaining the team. You have these guys that are under team control through 2027, 2028. And they keep kind of every offseason, they're rewarding their own as well. I really wasn't that concerned about the offense, even with the change in coordinator, until Frank Ragnow retired. Because while Jared Goff is a veteran, I was like, hey, all right, you got one of the best centers in the league too. Like the tandem of those two guys, they're in the rhythm of it. They understand what they're looking at. They know how this is supposed to feel, look, do, all of that. They no longer have. And they have a rookie in Tate Ratledge now at center. And it's nice you have some experience around him, but the center is the most important position on the offensive line. It's arguably the second most important position behind a quarterback on an offense. And to have a rookie in there, there's going to be some bumps in the road. I think there's going to be a learning curve between the Ragnow, retirement, and between the coordinator. Because also, that's the other thing too that I'll keep reminding people. It wasn't just Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn that left. It was they took coaches with them. So Antoine Randall, for instance, the receivers coach in Detroit, now in Chicago with Ben Johnson. You have a couple other guys. You have your tight ends coach, who is now the offensive line coach in New York under Aaron Glenn. These are like, all of those absences are going to be felt even as much as this roster is set up for success, just purely from a personnel standpoint. So I don't have a great answer for you, Mina, other than Jared Goff is more of a veteran.
I think that matters a lot. I think the fact that these skill players are almost exactly the same, right? They kept everybody. That helps a lot. These guys know the offense. They're not reinventing the wheel here. My Ben Solak, pointed out when we did the top 10 offenses pod that they did keep Hank Fraley, who was the offensive line coach, who Seattle considered as a coordinator. So that really helps in terms of the continuity with the run game. But to your point, I'm actually more worried about the interior of the offensive line than the coordinator change. At least the coordinator change, I think they can figure out, even if he struggles, or maybe there's certain games where they're missing the ingenuity and game planning. The interior of the offensive line is something I'm just gonna have to see to get a feel for whether or not it's going to be an issue. Can Tate Ratledge play center right for them? Mahogany was good last year when he played, but it's still a change. With yeah, that's concerning. I have been so impressed by Jared Goff over the last few years. I think he has become really like his best self in Detroit, and he's absolutely I believe firmly that he is absolutely a quarterback that you can make a deep playoff run with. You can go to he's been to the Super Bowl, right? That said, Lions fans, don't kill me. Pressure is still an issue. Last year, for example, when he was kept clean, second QBR, pressured 20th. When he was pressured on third down, he was 31st with a QBR of 1.8. It's just not his game. He's tough. He gets rid of the ball quickly. And because this team is so good at running the ball, he's often not in third and long. So this is not like a death knell issue. But, when we're talking about big games where things are tight, if this interior does not improve over the course of the season, if they don't grow together, this will be the thing we're talking about at the end of the season on what is otherwise a juggernaut of an offense.
Well, and it's so crucial too, because of the fact that, what's the quickest way to the quarterback? It's through the interior. And who is Jared Goff? He's not a scrambler. He's not a guy that's going to run around and buy you time in that way. He is a drop back, pure passer, pocket passer. And he needs, we talk about it, we need the clean pocket.
Yeah.
And I mean, the play action will help. I think that, again, that will continue because it's so ingrained in this offense, just in general, even in the personnel. You can kind of mitigate the rush in that way. And having a really badass run game helps out tremendously with a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, who can do so many different things, and then a bowling ball in David Montgomery to get you those tough yards in those short yardage situations. But at the end of the day, Jared Goff needs to be upright in order to really, for this offense to function at the level that it has, be as potent, as it has been, and score as many points. So that's what I am also, again, most concerned with. Like I said, I was not overly concerned with the Lions, even with all of the coaching changes. And then Frank Ragnow retired. And I was just like, because then it adds stuff to Jared Goff's plate too, where he might be a little, a fraction of a second late to reacting, because he's the one that is now making all of the identifications, the checks, the pre-snap stuff. Like, he is the one having to ID everything, whereas Frank Ragnow was so good at that because of the veteran that he was, and able to work so symbiotically with Jared Goff on those pre-snap decisions. And now it's like, all right, is Jared, his mind is going to be elsewhere trying to make up for that, because you can't expect a rookie to do that, a rookie center to do that. And that's the thing, is Tate Ratledge has taken, at least so far in OTAs, they did not have mini camp either because they have the Hall of Fame game. Tate Ratledge, though, has been in that center spot, and you have to think that that's why he was drafted as insurance. Because I mean, it
was coming. This was not like a surprise to them, the Ragnow thing. Like, we're not saying that like, whoa, they clearly been preparing for this. They've continued to invest in the offensive line. This is a very well run franchise, but going from one of the best players in football to a rookie, it's undeniably something to monitor. I forgot to mention this stat, by the way. I was talking about Jared Goff struggling on third when he was pressure on third down. Lions did have the shortest distance to go on third down in the NFL. So again, that mitigates that.
Testament to the run game. Yes.
Testament to the run game. The other thing that mitigates it, any concerns I have about the offense maybe taking a small step back, is I think this defense is going to rock.
Yeah.
I had them, I think, 6th in my top 10. Let's start there. Are you surprised by that? Is that too high? Or like, how do you view this defense overall going into the season?
No, I've loved this defense for a long time, and they've been unfortunately bitten by the injury bug, which has, just kind of made their production not what it could have been. And I loved the pickup of DJ Reed this offseason. I think that was needed. But getting Aiden Hutchinson back, I do think that they aren't going to rush anything with him, and we maybe can't expect the Aiden Hutchinson we knew to start the season, but especially with those interior guys. I mean, I've just been shouting Aleem McNeil's name from the rooftops for the last couple of years because of how much he means to this defense up front and how little credit he gets for it. So a lot of those advantageous situations, yes, even if you double team Aiden Hutchinson, he can usually get past those. But a lot of those advantageous situations that we've seen for Aiden Hutchinson are because of guys like Aleem McNeil on the interior of that defensive line. And then on top of that, the linebacking core in Detroit also, I don't think, gets the credit that it deserves, between Jack Campbell, who was their first round pick a couple years ago, and then Alex Anzalone. I remember sitting down with Aaron Glenn when they drafted Jack Campbell, talking to him about Jack and what the vision was. And the vision was for him to be the middle linebacker for the next 10 to 12 years for the Detroit Lions. And so they are very pleased with his progress. He kind of falls into that, inside linebacker. I mean, I worked with Levante David for so many years, where you don't have the gaudy stats, but you are so incredibly crucial at directing traffic on the interior, going sideline to sideline. And that's something that Jack Campbell has increasingly gotten better at as, he's been developed in this scheme. And that's a testament to guys like even Kelvin Shepard, who has now taken over as defensive coordinator. I'm really excited to see kind of the continuation of this defensive scheme and the evolution of guys like Jack Campbell under Shep, because this is something that Aaron Glenn has prepared Shep for years at this point. It was always a matter of when, not if, that Kelvin was going to take over and somewhere and be a coordinator, because that's just how good of a coach he is. So and between that and Alex Anzalone, like this linebacking core just doesn't get the, I think, credit it deserves for anchoring this entire defense.
We often see these young linebackers take a couple years to really figure things out in the NFL. Like Campbell, I think, in coverage, you definitely saw some improvement. There's still some lapses, but again, when you think about the developmental curve of like linebackers in the league, there's absolutely reason to think he could be better this season. And also the spine, like you said, is so strong. I mean, you talked about the DTs. They drafted Tyleik Williams, by the way, who's a big much needed run stuffer. And with McNeil being injured at the start of the season will be important. This is arguably one of the best
safety room.
Yeah, in the NFL. Brian Branch.
No, I didn't even get there.
It's crazy. I mean, and then again, speaking of young players, Darian Arnold, most penalized DB, but you saw the flashes of sticky coverage. He takes a step forward. DJ Reed, Ennis Registraw comes back. It's just a very deep, very good group. And obviously the hope is with Hutchinson back and with fewer injuries, they don't have to blitz on literally every down. I know as well.
You saw that too at the beginning of last season when Hutchinson was still in there. Like they were, it was a very healthy kind of split as far as 4-man rushes went and blitzes. But like, I mean, as the injuries started to pile up, you could literally see the wheels in Aaron Glenn's head turning, like, well, guess we're just going to have to send more guys. Like, we have no other choice.
When they didn't, when they blitzed over the course of the season, they were 13th in yards per play. When they sent standard pressure, they were 29th in yards per play. They just weren't able to get to the quarterback and affect him enough to not give them time. So yeah, I just think that there's enough proven stars, ascending young players, and savvy additions to make me excited about this unit. I also think, they benefit from complementary football. This is a team that, even though we've expressed some concerns about some changes in the offense, they're still going to be hella good. So, they're going to be put in places where they get to get after the quarterback too. And yeah, so I'm very high on this defense. I think, to put a pin on it again, even if the offense drops from like top 3 to top 5 or 6, the defense can more than compensate for that. And this is still a very, very good football team. All right, let's take a quick break, come back, and talk about a team with a lot more mystery around it, the Minnesota Vikings. All right, we are back. I didn't talk about the Vikings offense on my top 10 offenses pod, even though, Carmen, I could completely see a world in which this finishes as a top 10 offense. I could also see a world in which it falls behind last year. So much depends on the unknown entity that is the rookie quarterback. So let's start. You got to start there with the Minnesota Vikings. What are we hearing about JJ McCarthy? What are the expectations? Let's talk about like how the offense will look the same or different. There's a lot to unpack with him, but you know, you're talking to people there. You're very immersed in it. Let's just tell me everything you know about him.
I think the overwhelming kind of sentiment I get from people about JJ McCarthy is just, it's cautious optimism. Nobody is, shouting from the rooftops like, oh, this kid's going to be great and everything's going to be fine. And like, just like, look at what we did last year. We're going to win 14 games again and blah, 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 blah. No one's saying that. No one's saying that they're overly concerned either. It is just kind of, I think they have a very healthy, very realistic outlook. JJ McCarthy did go through some setbacks during his recovery process. I mean, that's something that they are first and foremost going to make sure that he is 100% healthy. Now, he said he's going to be ready to go for camp. That's what the Minnesota Vikings are planning for. But it wouldn't be the first time. If there is a setback or if we do hear something, it wouldn't be the first time at this point. And you want to make sure that if all of your eggs are in this blue and maize gold basket, that you are going to make sure that he is ready to go for the long haul. So that is cautious optimism, I think, is just the best way I can describe kind of the sentiment around JJ McCarthy at this point. But I really do think, I keep using this term, even though I don't think it actually exists. I think they've quarterback proofed their team as much as possible. Now, can you ever quarterback proof a team? No, that's the most important, position in football. But they have insulated against what they are like. They are against a learning curve for JJ McCarthy. They are planning for the learning curve. And that's evident in the work that they did on the interior of the offensive line, which is arguably the biggest concern going in, from last season going into this year. I really, really like this offensive line now, especially if you get Christian Darrisaw back healthy right away, which isn't a guarantee right now. I would say so. They're hoping, I think, but there is a very real chance he will not be ready to start the season. However, knowing Christian Darrisaw, he will do everything he can to, be there and be out there. And I do still think that Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill are two of the best. They're one of the best tackle tandems in the league. And you did all that work on the interior. I think that Ryan Kelly can really be kind of maybe one of the steals of this free agency period of this offseason. I really, really loved that pickup. And especially, again, this is what I was begging the Bears to do when it came to Caleb Williams last year.
Very similar logic, right? With these teams being like, we got these because essentially we're hitting reset on Caleb, hitting reset with JJ McCarthy. Let's give them veteran centers. Let's focus on bolstering. Both teams took a very intentional approach to bolstering the interior of the offensive line.
Yes, and this is everything I wanted to see, and so I'm excited about it. And they, for that matter, the Minnesota Vikings also took a very intentional approach to beefing up the interior of their defensive line. I loved all of their moves this offseason. And again, it was about making sure that they could play complementary football to insulate against the inevitable learning curve that's going to come with JJ McCarthy making his first starts.
That's what I want to talk about, complementary football. Because, we keep talking about this offense like being like a Lamborghini and JJ's just being given the keys to it. And obviously this is, alongside the Eagles, like the best group of skill. I mean, just ridiculous, right? Receiver, tight end talent. But they were not good at running the football last year. And they knew they weren't good at running the football, right? This is a team, I've talked about this, I faced second most too high in the NFL. This has been the case for a while. But Kevin O'Connell didn't want to, slam his head against the wall and get negative runs and set back the offense. one thing that caught my eye when they were in 11 personnel, they only ran the ball 25% of the time because they were awful at it. So to go back to like this was not a balanced offense. Kevin O'Connell comes from the Sean McVay tree. He wants to tie the run and the pass together, and I would argue that's integral for JJ McCarthy, who is coming from this very run heavy play action offense where he thrives throwing the ball over the middle of the field. So I believe that the investment that they've made in the interior of the offensive line, which was their undoing in the postseason in some ways, is as much about running the ball better as it is about protecting JJ McCarthy and helping him with the veteran center. Because when you ask me, like, what is it going to take for him to succeed? They got to run the football better than they have the last few years with this young quarterback.
Well, and again, their moves reflected that, whether it be the interior of the offensive line, which should open up those rushing lanes and really make it life easy on JJ McCarthy and more of what he was used to at Michigan. But they re-signed Aaron Jones, but then they signed Jordan Mason. And I don't really know how they got Jordan Mason and just kind of snatched him right up. And I just think that this is now a really good tandem in the offensive backfield that can support, like you said, this kind of marriage between the run and the pass in this this McVay tree offense. And they live in 11 personnel still, like, and they're going to run it out of 11 personnel, but just to have the changeup of those backs and have the opportunity to go 21 whenever they want and kind of switch into that. I'm very excited to see Kevin O'Connell do that, because it's not something that he's really had. They tried to do it with Alexander Madison, and like that just didn't work as the second back. And again, it was really like banging your head against a brick wall. Like, we want this to work. We want this to work. It just didn't. But now I think they have the opportunity to do that.
And I like him. I did think that was a sneaky pickup. They traded a 5th rounder for him. So it's basically, and he doesn't have a lot of wear. He's a young guy, played one season really. I always like looking at the next gen stats, rushing yards over expected per carry. And he was 3rd amongst all back. This is trying to isolate statistically what the back is doing separate from the blocking, and accounting for defensive positioning. So 3rd amongst all running backs with 100 plus carries, Jordan Mason. So that's there's a few advanced stats that favor him. I think it's a good marriage with Aaron Jones. We don't even have to talk about the receivers. The one thing we should note, we talked about this before, is Jordan Addison has a trial going on involving a reckless driving charge. I think I saw it reported it could be a 3-game suspension. I don't want to say that firmly. Obviously, that's something to monitor, because while this is a very talented group, it's a very top-heavy group, right? So, and Jordan Addison was very good last year. So losing him, I think, would be pretty bad for this offense. But we'll see how that one plays out.
Yeah, the drop off, after Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I mean, your third highest receiver in terms of workload and yardage totals is TJ Hawkinson. So you're not those pieces are going to be integral to being consistent too. Like God forbid Justin Jefferson gets hurt or is out of the lineup or anything like that, because then this offense really doesn't have anywhere to go. And you want as much available to JJ McCarthy as he kind of evolves and gets comfortable in this scheme and with football at the NFL level.
Yeah, I think about JJ McCarthy, when it's working, he's throwing the ball deep over the middle of the field, something he's very good at. So Jordan Addison, I think, is really important in that regard. Obviously, Jefferson is the guy. They would probably lean heavily into the 2 tight ends, right? They re-signed Oliver, who's like one of the better blocking tight ends in football. So, I am optimistic. I kind of revisited my McCarthy notes, and I liked the pick. I thought he was a good fit for this offense. I thought he needed to work a little bit on touch, throwing outside, but he's athletic. He's good throwing on the run. He brings a little bit of mobility to the offense, and he has a strong arm, and he can throw over the middle of the field. So
I think he brings more mobility too than he really gets credit for. I mean, that's what some of the things that I've heard from either people that scouted him in college, or some of the guys that have been with him in Minnesota so far. Like, he's very athletic,
Yeah.
And that's something that they would plan on utilizing provided he's 100% healthy, which is why I think there's such an emphasis on making sure that he is 100% because they want to utilize that part of his game too.
Defense, I had them in my top 10. I was very high on them. I think the biggest question is can the pressure, which has been, I've talked about the Brian Flores defense and how they get pressure and how unique it is structurally and all of that. Can it still be good enough or potentially even better to mitigate what I believe is a very weak cornerback room and sneaky suddenly, you lose Cam Bynum, the safety room,
Right.
Harrison Smith is a little older too.
Yeah.
So I think, can they continue to stress quarterbacks enough to compensate for that with pressure and scheme? That to me is the big question.
It is. And that's kind of where Brian Flores, I think, wants to live, though. Although I will say that I do think, and this is, probably echoing Minnesota fans who are very pro Byron Murphy and don't want him to get lost in the shuffle,
Good
doesn't
player.
get the credit he's due. Like there's a Byron Murphy hive within Vikings fans, and I appreciate it. Listen, I think that you're right. Like they're right. He did not get kind of some of the credit that he deserves, and they believe in him as a corner. But to your credit, or to your point, that's not necessarily where Minnesota wants to live. They want to live up front and with all of these exotic packages, the blitz rate, the simulated pressures, all of that kind of stuff. Actually, there's a funny, I called it kind of a laughable stat, but it's a real stat. It's one of those things that you look at and you go, what? Which there are so many for Brian Flores, for the record, but it
Yeah.
was specifically some of the advanced pass rush metrics where it was the line of scrimmage defender drop rate. So how many times you have defenders that are lined up on the line of scrimmage dropping into coverage? 49.8% of the time, Flo is dropping defenders from the line of scrimmage into coverage, which is insane. He's asked Harrison Smith, who is
Yeah.
47 years old at this point, to do that. And I've talked to Harrison Smith about that at various points, just being like, how? Um, and it's just sheer will, belief. I don't know. You're like, well, he wants me to do it. I'm going to go do it. And it's really just just how multiple the front can be is really fun for me. I love
Yeah.
watching his game. They blitz six at the second highest rate in the league too. So like sometimes that's what adds to honestly the simulated pressures and why they're so effective too, is because sometimes when there are six guys on the line of scrimmage, he is bringing all six.
Yeah.
And it really keeps an offense guessing. I was actually at a pass rush summit last week in Tempe, Arizona, where Jonathan Grenard and Dallas Turner were working out. And this is the dead period of the NFL. This is where the guys get to go on vacation. And this is really like 6 sacred weeks, I always say, of time where these guys actually get off between mini camp and when training camp starts up. Well, in 115-degree heat, which I don't have to tell you about, Mina, Jonathan Grenard and Dallas Turner, attached to his hip, were working out at BT Jordan's Pass Rush Summit in the bubble on Arizona State's campus, which was fun for me because I went there. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, and Jonathan Grenard is going through these individual pass rush drills with his helmet on. He's got he's just in regular workout clothes, but he put his helmet on so he could work on his pass rush moves, like with all of that. And throughout the entire time, Dallas Turner was right there with him. And I had a chance to kind of talk to Jonathan a little bit about the development of Dallas and how much he's taking responsibility for it. And trying to help him along too, so that they have that chemistry as those bookends. And then you add obviously Andrew Van Ginkel into that whole mix, and then it just gets to be real fun.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I think there's a couple things that I think are key to all of this, I guess, for Minnesota. The pressure question. One is like how much of Dallas Turner not really seeing the field as much as his draft status would suggest
Right.
had to do with the fact that he was just playing behind Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel.
Right.
Can he take another step? I do think that some of it is just those two guys being awesome and a perfect fit for the scheme. I mean, Jonathan Grenard was awesome last
Yes.
year. Van Ginkel was crazy, of course. Jonathan Grenard was second amongst all edges and pressures, which I was like, really? When I saw that, I couldn't believe it. But it was 84 ahead of Hendrickson. On the interior, the Vikings didn't have a defensive tackle until, in terms of pressure rankings, until 39. That was
Yeah.
Jihad Ward. So that brings me to the other thing, which is, can either one of Jonathan Allen or Javon Hargrave, were the two veteran defensive tackles they brought in, give them more juice rushing
Yeah.
on the inside? I think that could be one of the questions that swings this for them in terms of like, what's the difference between being good and great?
And I really don't think that they would have been so eager to sign in Minnesota too if that wasn't the case. And you look at it, obviously they play completely different positions, but you look at Harrison Smith, like I said, he's 47 years old. He's not, he's 36. I forget. I think he's my age. The oldest player in the league, you know, and an ancient, whatever. He talks all the time about how, I mean, Brian Flores is able to get so much more out of these guys because of the multiplicity of the scheme and how much it thrives off of a rotation. And yes, you're going to ask your guys to do some things like, again, drop into coverage off of the line of scrimmage. And I don't think John Allen and Javon Hargrave are going to be exempt from that. So get ready, guys. But I do think that having that rotation is crucial, not only to keeping these offenses guessing and on their heels, but it also keeps these guys fresh on the interior, and it prevents it spreads out the workload a little bit more. And especially when the pressure can come from anyone, can be brought from anywhere. It's not all on those front four, front five guys to constantly be the ones to bring pressure. And so I really do think that it kind of can expand or extend the lifespan of some of these guys' careers, or at least that's the thought process behind adding guys like this. And I do think that that's going to bring a lot more juice. I mean, I know that these guys are technically in the twilight of their careers or entering into that, but if anybody can figure out just how much they have left in the tank and how to maximize it, I think it's Flo. And I'm really excited about that for those guys. And I think it makes the Minnesota defense that much scarier.
I'm optimistic. I wouldn't hate it if they brought in a free agent corner. Gilmore is still there.
Even from depth, like just from sheer like depth purposes.
It's just, you know, because again, we're not asking this defense to be good. We're asking them to be great. They already are great, of course. But you know, just sustaining that level of play is very hard. But you know, they have one of the 2 or 3 best defensive coordinators in football, so that helps a lot. Okay, let's wrap with the Green Bay Packers, who also have a very good defensive coordinator. Continuity, though, you know, in terms of both sides of the ball, not losing anyone in their coaching staff. Let's start again with the offense. Jordan Love is such a funny one. I feel like I'm higher on him than a lot of my peers. These quarterback rankings are coming out, and I'm seeing he's been definitely bounced from the top 10 in a lot of these lists. Yeah. It's funny because I was looking at some of his splits, trying to figure out like what went wrong, what went right, where can he improve. But it's really not like, oh, Jordan Love was bad at this one specific thing or great at this one specific thing. When you look over the course of the season, he finishes like very high in advanced stats in just about everything, other than throwing interceptions under pressure, which is the thing he has to
clean up.
But
the Brett Favre in him.
Yeah, you know, he just can't resist it. But I think what I would say is it's less about like situations and more just about streaks. And I think like with him, that's what makes him kind of hard to talk about. It's like not like you can point to something and say he has to be better at this. There are a couple of things, but it's more just like consistency over the course of a whole season. He was dealing with injuries last year, of course, at the beginning. But like to me, it's just like the high end play is so high that I don't see how you can be pessimistic, even if there are some streaks of substandard performance for him.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't rest. All this inconsistency doesn't rest solely on Jordan Love either, because the offensive core that he's throwing to was also in flux for most of the season, whether that be from injury or the fact that Matt LaFleur said he was allergic to having a wide receiver one. There wasn't that guy that he could just hone in on and know, hey, listen, like it wasn't like Aaron Rodgers with Devontae Adams or Jordy Nelson before him. It was, who do we have available today? Do we have, like, I mean, and the Packers are also the only team that I've ever seen, and correct me if you've seen someone else do this, that suspends their own players. Like when you have like Romeo Dobbs like missing time because the team is suspending him for like conduct detrimental to the team, but like without any sort of impending discipline coming down from the league. It was just because the Packers wanted to make a point. it's one of those things where that ultimately just hurts your team, that hurts your offense, that hurts Jordan Love. I will say the one concern I've had with him, and I'm much higher than him, I think, than most too, is that so many of his highlight worthy plays and everything come from the back foot, off of his back foot.
Mhm.
He's very rarely set when he is throwing the ball. And it just so happens that because he had a rapport with that receiver or whatever, that it ends up working out. But you saw last year where that really comes into play when it comes to, all right, I don't have the guys I'm used to around me. I've been in and out of the lineup myself. Now everything is off. We don't have the timing down, all of that kind of stuff. So there needs to be, I think, a more like just more what's the word I'm looking for? More structure. There it is.
No,
But
he has to quit that fadeaway addiction.
the fadeaway, like it's cool to watch and it's great when it works out. But I'm
Yeah.
like, Jordan, set your feet. Like we need to set our feet.
The other thing that drives me crazy with him, and I've talked about this before, there's no reason why how old is he? Let me guess, like 25, 26?
26.
He's probably at least 26.
I think
26.
26 or
Okay.
20. Yeah, because he was,
There's
fat.
no reason why 26-year-old Jordan Love, even with his injuries, should have fewer carries than Matthew Stafford.
Yes, he's
Fair example.
mobile. He's
He knows
very
this.
mobile.
We talked about it at the Super Bowl. He came on NFL Live, and I was like, "Dude, you got to carry the football." When they turn their back to you, and he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "It's something I'm going to work on next year." It's just that's I'm not asking him to be Jalen Hurts or Lamar, or he doesn't have to carry it as much as Joe Burrow or whatever. But
Yeah.
I just got to carry
But
it
even
more
like
than that.
the design, like I was looking at some of the stats on just kind of design rollouts and just how few he has and how rarely he does that. And I'm like, why can't we get that?
It would
I
help the
do
run
think.
game too, by the way, so much if he was a threat to keep it a little bit
I
more.
mean, I think that, Josh Jacobs being as good as Josh Jacobs is really kind of like hampers the need for innovation and creativity when it comes to the run game because Josh Jacobs is just as effective as anyone, just being a straight runner. But the other thing I wanted to bring up too was that, you know, Packers receivers had the second highest drop rate of any team last year. And so again, and that speaks to the continuity, the lack thereof of continuity, and there is some stuff going on behind the scenes, and it's why I kind of even brought up like Packers suspending their own players or conduct detrimental, all that other stuff, where you do see Roma Dunze coming out and being mad that he wasn't getting the touches that he wanted, or that that he thought he deserved, and then like you have kind of this underlying thing when
Romeo
what?
Dobbs? Romeo
Yeah,
Dobbs?
Romeo Dobbs. Who did I say?
I didn't say.
Oh, Dunze. Oh God. All right, no, not a Dunze. He's a doll. Not that Romeo Dobbs isn't. He's a really nice guy. It's just there's
No,
egos
he
involved
was
in all of
definitely
this.
disgruntled last year. There's no way of
And like we kind of like dismiss that because it's like, oh, it's the Packers and like they'll figure it out. But like
no.
all of that is bubbling under the surface. Like you need to figure out, it goes back to again, more structure within the offense. And we know that Matt LaFleur is capable of that. Because not only do you have all these wide receivers, but now you drafted Matthew Golden, first time you've drafted, a wide receiver in the first round since Jordy Nelson. But you wonder how long it's going to take for him to really end up being that wide receiver one. Sorry, Matt LaFleur. But on top of that, you've got Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, the tight ends, who Matt LaFleur loves to use. He loves using tight ends, and I love it when he does as well. But now that's a lot of mouths to feed, and then your only consistency, your only continuity has really come from the run game. On top of that, so it's just there was just last year. I just felt like it was just a little discombobulated, and they still made the playoffs. So like none of this is dire. I'm not saying that the Packers, you shouldn't worry about them. And in fact, I think it's setting them up for a really potentially really good year where we could see the Packers on the top of the NFC North again this year. Like that would not shock me in the least.
I think
Um,
for things to have to go right on this offense,
yeah.
Love would have to be more consistent over because again, his highs are, I would say a high is they're up there top 3, 4, 5 in football, but got to see that over the course of the season.
Right.
I would like to see more these receivers kind of fall into more defined roles.
Yeah.
And this was the youngest offense in football last year, but it was the youngest the year before. It's like, okay, at a certain point, like we can't keep saying, well, they're young and they have a lot of drops and some confusion. You'd like to see some I think, it doesn't have to be necessarily a number one per se, but like, is Matthew Golden the designated deep threat? Is Romeo
Yes.
Dobbs a guy you can count on to work the short intermediate parts of the field for Jordan Love? We know Jaden Reed plays more of the gadgety type role, but are those your big three? We feel good about that. It's like, okay. And I think, the offensive line, there's some questions too with Walker. You bring in Aaron Banks at guard. Elton Jenkins is a little bit, that's a shaky situation with him and his contract.
Right.
But
Where he's going to play. I don't know.
what position? Yeah, right. There's enough on paper here though for me to still feel I had them ranked high. They were in my top 10 offenses.
Yeah.
But there's just, it's
And you don't want to totally lose, you know, the guessing game of who's going to get the ball. Like I think that was a strength
yes.
2 years ago in that really deep surprise playoff run where like you legitimately didn't know who was going to get the ball because they were all capable of it. And I think that there's room for that too in all of this, but it can't just be the wild west up in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
I think, yeah, no, I think the put it plainly, like we can't be talking about the offense again in the same way that we did the last 2 years. Because last year it felt like I was like, oh, okay, I'm kind of saying the stuff I did the year before, but they're kind of still having the same problems, still the same highs. You're still optimistic. You still see the talent, but then you're also like, well, they're young. It'll come together and we'll figure out. It's like, what? Okay, but now we're in year 2 of this group together, sort of. So I think you really need to see that firmed up a bit. Defensively, we'll wrap here. This is the defense that finished very high statistically in a lot of metrics. Talked about that. At first, I was like, "Oh, this is very turnover dependent," and that's true. But when you dig into the underlying stats over the second half of the season, they were good in success rate and metrics that aren't dependent on turnovers. Jeff Hafley, I thought, did an excellent job of altering his scheme from college, playing to the strengths of his players. Xavier McKinney was a superstar, but you also saw real young guys who they drafted just last year play really well, notably Edgerrin Cooper, who was amazing for them. Javon Bullard comes in, Evan Williams, just really, really good players.
Right.
That said, still not a great pass rush.
No.
And I have concerns about the corner group. It really is in some ways like the inverse of the offense, where it's like young, they're talented, but is there a closer? Do they have enough dudes? You really feel the same way about both sides of football, like really good, but are they great? So let me put it to you this way. Who needs to break out in this group for you to feel really good about this Packers defense?
I think the overwhelming answer, not just mine, but the overwhelming answer would be Rashawn Gary. That's what everyone wants is
He was
just
like
to see.
80 on the NFL 100 or something. He was like weirdly high in that. Anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Kenny Clark actually posted it too, and he was like, "Look at my dog." And to be fair, I will try to put Packers fans at ease a little bit because at this pass rush summit I talked about that Jonathan Grenard and Dallas Turner were at, the driving force and the most visible player that is associated with BT Jordan's pass rush summit is in fact Rashawn Gary. So Rashawn Gary has been part of it since its inception. This summit started as a nose tackle summit, but Rashawn had worked with BT Jordan before and just decided he was going to show up anyway. So he did, and that's how this whole thing was kind of born. And so it was him and Kenny Clark that were there. I talked to both of them extensively, just kind of about not only what they were doing there, obviously in their timeout, and what Rashawn in particular was trying to work on, because he's like, listen, going into year 7, I know what I like to do, I know how to do it, but there are some tools that I want to add. There's some things I want to hone. But he was very candid with me when talking about the transition into Jeff Hafley's scheme, because this was the first time that the Packers are running a base 4-3, they're base 4-2-5, but base 4-3 in 15 years. And while defensive schemes are more multiple, that are more, kind of fluid than ever, that's the word I want to use there. When you have a certain system so ingrained in a culture, especially like the Packers, that comes through in all of the guys that you have available to you from a personnel standpoint. So there was a lot of kind of turnover and figuring out where guys fit last year. And you saw that with guys like Preston Smith getting traded at the deadline, where they just realized like these guys just weren't going to fit into the scheme that they had. And so that also, even the guys that survived and are still on the roster, they had to take last year to kind of figure out exactly where they fit in and how they can exploit their strengths to benefit the system. And that's what Rashawn talked to me about extensively, where he's like, he loves Jeff Hafley, he loves the system, but the expectation is just that much more clear now. His role is that much more defined now, and so he hears everything. He told me, like, he's like, I hear, I know how people think of me, I know what's expected of me, I know I haven't lived up to it yet.
You're 80 of 100. Apparently, people like you more than
I went into it kind of like a little timid too, because I kind of like sat down next to him after he was done with this couple of drills, and I was like, "Hey, Rashawn, like, how are you? Do you mind, like, talking to me about whatever?" And we talked just kind of at length about even philosophy and pass rush philosophy. And I mean, the way that Rashawn was chirping at all of the other guys just during drills, him and Walter Nolan at one point kind of got into it, like the rookie out of Ole Miss. It was so funny to see that, but it was all in the name of, he was like, it's all, a brotherhood, it's all camaraderie. I want to make everybody around me better. And that's not just with my position group, that's in Green Bay too. And he brought up Kenny Clark multiple times, who was there with him. And Kenny was the same way, kind of talking to me just about the culture and the expectations that are instilled in them as part of the Packers organization, and how they are expected to contend every single year. And I think every year that goes by that the Packers don't reach the mountaintop, they don't get to a chance at that Lombardi trophy named after their former coach, they understand that they're taken a little bit less seriously every single time that they fail to do that. So it was really interesting to just kind of catch up with them.
I love that. Great answer.
I really think that, Rashawn, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen this year. And he has very crystal clear expectations of what he's supposed to do.
I mean, he stands out as like, okay, who's your edge? There's been moments where he's looked like that dude. He's good against the run. He's very strong. He rushes with power. But, I don't think anybody would rank him in the upper echelon of pass rushers in the league. It's like, well, if not him, who? I mean, Cooper's an amazing rusher, but he's an off-ball linebacker, and they need him.
Yes.
So yeah, I think he's one to watch. You talked about the scheme change. I thought Devontae Wyatt at times really benefited from that.
Yes.
The 4 down front. And I think if he's healthy, he could be impactful as well. There's good players, like Carl Brooks is good. Enigbari is flashed. Van Ness is fine, but there just isn't, it's frankly very similar to the wide receiver discussion, where it's like, okay, but like, who's the dude?
Who's the dude?
They're still good. I mean, like, there's enough talent at all 3 levels. There's not, like, I would say corner is similar to the Vikings. My biggest question about this. And that's not because they lost Alexander. I know Packers fans were like, we didn't have him last year either. But, you're looking at Nixon on the outside, Hobbs probably on the outside primarily. Maybe he'll slide inside to nickel on money downs and Valentine. It's not a top corner group in the league by any means. Safety group's amazing. Linebacker group's really good. But
Xavier McKinney really covered up a lot of deficiencies last year.
Exactly. So, I do think you need a little bit more. Gary, to me, is a very good answer in terms of getting pressure. They drafted also Baron Sorrell. See if he gets something. I'm saying his name wrong, but maybe you get something from him in terms of getting after the quarterback. But this is another defense that I think benefits from complementary football, because I do like this offense a lot. So I think they'll be, in good situations. And I'm high on this team, I guess, which brings me to the final thing we do here, which is trying to guess how they're all rank the shake out.
I'm so tired of this question, Mina.
This is a difficult division, I think, to rank.
It's so hard to do it for this division in particular.
Okay, so I'm not trying to get, you can answer it on your own, but I think the conventional thought is Lions, Packers, Vikings, Bears. That seems to be the standard. I'm sure that's what Vegas, without looking. So that's what I'll say, is that we're comfortable with that. But I could see the Packers jumping the Lions. I could see the Bears jumping the Vikings. If JJ's good, I could see the Vikings jump. Like, it's
right.
It really, these are 4 really good teams, all of which I think have playoff potential. I mean, obviously the Lions, but even the Bears, things shake out right, could also be in the mix for a wild card.
For sure. And the one thing I'll add to that then, because I agree with you, it's probably that's the safe bet right now at this stage, in July. But the one thing that I will add to that is that all right, well, if the Bears are going to be improved, and you're going to play this insane interdivision schedule, but then also have to play the AFC North, also have to play the NFC East. These wins have to come from somewhere, or the losses come from somewhere.
Right.
And so, in the way that it took the Lions 15 games to win this division last year, I don't see that happening this year. I think this is a division because A, I think they're going to cannibalize each other. B, they have a really tough schedule outside of their own division. I think this is a division is up for grabs with 11 or 12 wins. And because it's up for grabs with 11 or 12 wins, then I have really no idea who ends up in that top spot. Because I think all of these teams, again, with some caveats of like JJ McCarthy is good and things go well with Ben Johnson in Chicago, but all of these teams are capable of that.
Yeah.
So how that ends up shaking out it's going to be really fun to watch. It's such a fun division in general, especially because all of these teams are so entrenched in tradition and they all have these storied rivalries, and it's just like, they all kind of hate each other, and it's like it's so much fun as someone who got to cover it, and I now cover the whole league, but it's still near and dear to my heart. I love this division. I think it's gonna be so much fun to watch, but like I'm so tired of people asking me like, "Oh, how do you think it's gonna?" Can the answer just be I don't know, and that's fun, and that's a good thing.
We could go with we'll stick with the chalky rankings. Yeah, I am excited to watch all of these teams though. Carmen, I'm also excited to watch you anytime you're talking football. Can you let folks know where to find you and things that you'll be doing this summer?
Well, all of that stuff I talked about the Pass Rush Summit, I do have a couple articles actually coming out on foxsports.com, just kind of talking about what all the guys were doing there, and catching up with some of those guys and expectations for the Packers in particular. Got some really good stuff out of Rashawn and Kenny, so that was fun. But outside of that, I am also on Marquee in Chicago, talking about the Bears every week at the Chicago Football Show. So check that. You can just check my social media. I post pretty much everything on there. So, Carmen V, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky.
I'll link your handles when I send this out. But yeah, I love hearing you talk about football, but I especially do love hearing you talk about this division. So I was excited to have you come join me for this. And I'm excited to read your Pass Rush article. It sounds really fun. It sounds like you got a lot of cool stuff out of these guys. Yeah. I will be back next week with the AFC East and the Power Rankings pod on Monday. Also, I've mentioned this before, but I have a television movies pod that I do now with my buddy David Dennis Jr., where if you haven't been watching Love Island, and every time I tease it, you're like, I'm not going to listen to that. We are done with Love Island. Next week, we are going to talk about Superman, the movie. We're going to do a couple of movies before getting into some other TV shows. So check it out wherever you get pods. That is
Can
called
you do a pod on time management, please?
Time management.
Because I don't know how you do all of these things.
Now it's easier with Moop. It's much easier now with Love Island, which I swear to God is like the biggest time commitment I've ever engaged in. It's even more time consuming than football. But yeah, anyways, check it out. Viewer discretion. You can look that up wherever you get your pods. I also just did a Rewatchables pod where we talked about It's Complicated. I'm a huge Nancy Meyers fan, so you can check that out with The Ringer. In the meantime, thank you as always to my friends at Omaha Productions, our producers of this show, Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, Tucker Tashton. I'll see you guys next week.